Welcome, fellow learner. Today we're undertaking a deep dive into, the part of your body that is quite literally responsible for keeping the lights on.
Hmm.
We are talking about the brainstem. If the rest of the brain is, the control center for thought and planning, this compact structure, it's the non-negotiable headquarters of survival.
It really is. It's the stem of life, isn't it?
Yeah.
Connecting the massive cerebrum above, the spinal cord way down below, and the cerebellum tucked in at the rear.
Right.
And we receive this really detailed neuroanatomy source. So our mission today, I think, is to quickly map this complex structure.
Okay.
We need to define its three levels. It's the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata, and really get a handle on how the information highways passing through them govern everything: heart rate, consciousness, breathing.
Yeah, and that's the key thing, isn't it?
Hmm.
Understanding the difference between those highways, the tracks, and the local command centers, the nuclei. Because by using those features as our signposts, we can figure out why this small region is so clinically critical. I mean, tiny damage here can create catastrophic, really specific deficits.
You've hit the nail on the head. When
Yeah.
we talk about nuclei, we mean the gray matter, right? The clusters of nerve cell bodies processing information or sending signals out. And when we talk tracks, that's the white matter, those bundles of axons, the cables basically traveling to or from the rest of the central nervous system.
Okay, let's unpack this survival manual then. Explore the three essential levels of the brainstem, starting right at the top and working our way down.
Sounds good.
We begin with the most superior section, the midbrain.
Right, the midbrain. It acts primarily as the director for sort of immediate reflexive sensory response and also some high-level motor movement control. It links the forebrain to the rest of the brainstem.
Okay. And structurally, I remember reading it has these two very distinct features on the backside. They call them the four twins, the corpora quadrigemina.
That's them, corpora quadrigemina. And they are critical for rapid unconscious sensory processing.
Okay.
The upper pair, the superior colliculi, they're all about visual reflexes. They help coordinate your head and eye movements in response to what you see. Think about saccadic eye movements, like that quick unconscious jerk your eyes make when you look between 2 points.
Like your eyes just snapping to attention, almost like a camera tripod adjusting itself automatically.
Precisely, yeah, good analogy. And the lower pair, the inferior colliculi, they do a similar job but for sound. Processing auditory information, helping you figure out where sound is coming from, triggering your startle response.
Oh, right.
And right nearby, actually running through the center of the midbrain, we also find the periaqueductal gray, the pei-pei.
Vague.
Yeah, it's a major command center for regulating pain perception and also defensive behaviors.
That's fascinating. A built-in pain regulator sitting right next to the immediate reflex centers. But for the bigger picture motor movement, the midbrain's also home to one of the most clinically relevant structures, right? The substantia nigra.
Oh, absolutely. This is, you could say, the engine room for smooth, intentional motion. The substantia nigra contains these highly specialized neurons that produce dopamine.
Dopamine.
Yes, and these neurons are crucial because they communicate with the basal ganglia to modulate starting and stopping movement, getting it all smooth.
And the surprising link here, I suppose it's not surprising to neurologists, but maybe to others, is that when these dopamine neurons degenerate and that engine stalls, that is the fundamental cause of Parkinson's disease.
Exactly. A tiny structure in the midbrain dictates the loss of motor control across the entire body. It's quite profound.
Yeah.
And nearby, we also find the ventral tegmental area, the VTA, another dopamine group of neurons. But this one is central to the brain's reward and motivation pathways. So you can see how tightly packed movement, motivation, and sensory integration are right here in this top segment.
It's incredibly dense. Now, before we move down, we have to mention the cranial nerves that pop out here. Cranial nerve the third, the oculomotor, emerges near that motor control area, the substantia nigra. But cranial nerve the fourth, the trochlear nerve, it's an outlier, isn't it? It's the only cranial nerve that wraps around and emerges from the posterior, the back surface of the brainstem.
It is, yeah. It's a neat anatomical quirk. Helps clinicians localize damage sometimes. Okay, so shall we descend? Segment 2, the pons.
The pons. Pons literally means bridge, right? Which seems like a perfect description.
It really is. It's that big convex bulge you see between the midbrain and the medulla. And if you were looking at the front, the anterior surface, you'd see the basilar artery just resting right in the middle groove.
Which tells you just how vulnerable the pons is, I guess. Damage to that one major vessel. That could mean massive damage to the whole structure.
Absolutely catastrophic. Functionally, the pons is really all about refined coordination and modulation. Its pontine nuclei, they act as a crucial relay station, talking extensively to the cerebellum.
Through the cerebellar peduncles.
Exactly, the massive middle cerebellar peduncles. This is how the brain refines movements, makes them smooth and accurate, not jerky.
And it also helps modulate breathing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Keeping those essential life rhythms going alongside the medulla.
It does, yes. But the chemical factory inside the pons is what really stands out for me. The locus coeruleus,
Ah, yes. The blue spot.
that's the one, our primary norepinephrine spigot for the brain. This nucleus, located towards the back posteriorly, produces norepinephrine and projects it pretty much throughout the entire central nervous system.
Wow.
It's a huge component of the reticular activating system. It acts like the main switch for alertness, focus, wakefulness.
So it's kind of like the brain's alertness alarm clock. Wakes everything up.
Precisely, yeah. And what's fascinating here, clinically speaking, is its involvement in disease. The source we looked at notes that the locus coeruleus is one of the earliest brain structures to suffer compromise in Alzheimer's disease.
Really. Before major memory problems.
Long before major memory deficits often appear, which really underscores its role as a crucial node for overall cognitive health, not just simple alertness.
That's incredible. Okay, now we get down to the anchor of life itself. Segment 3, the medulla oblongata.
Mm-hmm.
This is the most inferior bit, connecting the pons directly to the spinal cord,
Mm-hmm.
right at the level of that big hole in the skull, the foramen magnum.
That's it. And this is truly the body's non-negotiable life support system. The medulla houses the autonomic centers that regulate the absolute essentials: heart rate, blood pressure, basic involuntary respiratory rate.
Things you don't think about.
Exactly. And these centers can override voluntary control when necessary. It's the most humbling piece of neuroanatomy, I think.
It's also home to the biggest motor traffic junction in the entire nervous system, isn't it? On the anterior surface, the front, we find the pyramids. Explain the pyramidal decussation. That's key.
The pyramids, yes. They contain the corticospinal tracts, those main motor fibers coming down from the motor cortex. And right at this point, in the inferior medulla, about 85% of these fibers decussate.
They cross over.
They cross over to the opposite side of the body. They then continue down as the lateral corticospinal tract, controlling the muscles of your limbs, your arms, and legs.
And this single crossing explains that core rule of motor control we all learn. The left side of your brain controls the right side of your body and vice versa.
Exactly. Simple as that because of this crossover. Now, conversely, if you flip to the posterior surface, the back of the medulla, that's critical for high-fidelity sensory input.
Okay.
Here we find the gracile and cuneate nuclei. These are the processing centers for information that has traveled all the way up the spinal cord unchanged.
So these structures are collecting the really detailed sensory data, like proprioception, your sense of where your body is in space, plus fine touch, vibration, that sort of thing.
That's precisely it. And we'll detail this contrast more in just a moment, but it's crucial to note that sensory information is only synapsing here, unlike the motor tracts crossing in the pyramids.
Right.
These sensory tracts, they wait until after they hit these nuclei in the medulla to cross over and then ascend further. And that difference is a major diagnostic tool for doctors.
Interesting. Okay, so now that we've mapped the three houses, let's talk more about the highways that run through all of them. Let's start with that central regulating system, the reticular formation.
Ah, the reticular formation. Think of it as this continuous deep layer network. It extends through the entire brainstem and even down into the spinal cord. It's like a complex, diffuse switchboard that modulates almost everything.
We mentioned its role with the locus coeruleus and alertness, but its function is just sprawling, isn't it? It gets input from nearly every sensory pathway.
It does. It modulates movement coordination. It fine-tunes autonomic regulation, blood pressure, heart rate, and most critically, it manages the overall state of consciousness, that transition between wakefulness and sleep.
The master switch for being on or off.
In a way, yes. Now, when we look at descending motor control, those signals going down, we need to contrast the two main pathways using that decussation concept we just talked about in the medulla.
Okay.
So first, we have the corticospinal tracts. These mainly control the limbs and digits, and remember, about 85% crossover in the medulla.
Right, the big crossover the pyramids.
Then we have the corticobulbar tracts. Now, these are the motor fibers that specifically control the cranial nerve nuclei, so essentially managing the muscles of your face, head, and neck.
Okay, so controlling things like chewing, facial expressions, swallowing.
Exactly. And what's vital here is the difference in crossing over. While the corticospinal fibers largely cross, the corticobulbar fibers tend to receive bilateral input.
Bilateral, meaning from both sides.
Yes, meaning the nuclei controlling many facial muscles get input from both the left and right sides of the brain.
Ah, okay. So if you have a stroke that damages the motor cortex on, say, the left side, many of those facial muscles might still be partly spared because the intact right side is still sending signals down to the brainstem nuclei.
Precisely. It's like a protective redundancy built into the system for some really crucial functions.
Obvious.
And it's clinically useful, too. It allows clinicians to help localize whether the damage is up in the cortex where you might see sparing of muscles like the upper face, or if the damage is directly in the brainstem nucleus itself, where you'd likely see complete paralysis of that nerve's function.
Fascinating difference. Okay, let's switch to the sensory side now and revisit why that difference in crossover, the decussation point, is so crucial. We have two main body sensation pathways climbing up. First, the spinothalamic tract.
Right. The spinothalamic tract carries essential protective information, pain and temperature. What makes it unique is that its fibers cross over almost immediately upon entering the spinal cord, at whatever level they come in.
So pain from your right hand travels up the left side of your spinal cord and brainstem pretty much right away.
Exactly. Now contrast that with the dorsal column medial lemniscus system. That's the one involving the medullas, gracile, and cuneate nuclei we mentioned earlier.
The one for fine touch and proprioception.
Correct. This system carries that sophisticated sensory data. Proprioception, fine touch, vibration. Because this information is so detailed, maybe more complex, it's routed differently. These fibers ascend the spinal cord without crossing at all on the same side they entered.
Okay.
They wait to synapse and only decussate, crossover, after reaching the inferior medulla. At that point, they become the medial lemniscus tract and continue ascending.
So the general rule is kind of pain and temperature cross low in the spinal cord, detailed touch and position sense cross high in the medulla.
That's a great way to summarize it. And this creates unique clinical patterns. You could have a lesion high up in the brainstem that affects detailed sensation on the opposite side of the body. But pain sensation, which crossed way lower down, might be affected on the same side as the lesion, or maybe spared altogether, depending on the exact location. That difference in where the crossing happens is absolutely key to accurate diagnosis for neurologists.
Makes perfect sense why it's so important to know the pathways.
And we mustn't forget facial sensation. That's handled separately by the trigeminal lemniscus. It carries pain, temperature, and touch specifically for the face via that enormous cranial nerve V, the trigeminal nerve.
Right, the big one for the face.
Yeah.
Speaking of nerves, you mentioned CNV. 10 of the 12 cranial nerves actually emerge from nuclei within the brainstem, right?
That's
From
right.
CN the third all the way down to CN12.
That's right, 10 out of 12.
These nerves are the ultimate clinical localizers then. If you know which nerve isn't working, you can pinpoint the level of the brainstem involved, like cranial nerves, nayax, endocrine, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory. They control essential functions like swallowing, gag reflex, vocal cords, and they all emerge from the medulla.
Precisely. And because of this incredible density of tracts whizzing through and nuclei packed together, the brainstem is exceptionally vulnerable, especially concerning its blood supply.
Yeah, we mentioned the basilar artery on the pons.
Exactly. It's perfused by branches of the vertebral arteries, which merge to form that basilar artery. An occlusion, a blockage, anywhere in the system can lead to profound, often devastating stroke syndromes.
So what does that actually look like? Can you give us an example of how specific the deficits can be from a brainstem stroke?
Sure. One of the more commonly cited ones is the Wallenberg stroke, also called lateral medullary syndrome. Damage here affects structures on the side of the medulla, including the spinothalamic tract and vestibular nuclei.
Okay, so what happens to the patient?
Well, they often experience vertigo, dizziness, difficulty swallowing, hoarseness, and critically, loss of pain and temperature sensation. But here's the twist. Often, the pain temperature loss is on the opposite side of the body because that spinothalamic tract crossed low down. But they might have issues like facial numbness or coordination problems on the same side as the lesion in the medulla.
Yeah.
It's this crossed pattern that points right to the brainstem.
It's a complex puzzle. And it's horrifying to realize that compression can be just as deadly as a stroke, right?
Right.
Thinking about cerebellar tonsillar herniation.
Oh, absolutely. Where swelling or pressure in the skull forces brain tissue, specifically the cerebellar tonsils, downwards through the foramen magnum.
And it squeezes the medulla.
It compresses the medulla directly, and because that's where the cardiac and respiratory centers are, it can cause instantaneous respiratory and cardiac arrest. It is, quite literally, the ultimate failure of life support.
Which brings us, I think, to perhaps the most provocative demonstration of this structure's critical role. Locked-in syndrome.
Yes. What the source really highlighted here was the profound neurological separation this syndrome demonstrates. It's often caused by an ischemic stroke, a blockage, damaging the motor tracts, specifically the corticospinal and corticobulbar tracts, usually in the pons area.
So the motor output is gone.
Completely. The result is a patient who experiences complete quadriplegia, they can't move their limbs, and they cannot speak because the corticobulbar tracts are damaged. Yet, and this is the crucial part, the damage often spares the higher cognitive centers in the cerebrum and the reticular formation responsible for arousal. Meaning the patient remains conscious and fully aware of their surroundings. They're trapped inside their own body. They might only be able to communicate through blinking or perhaps slight vertical eye movements if those pathways are spared.
Truly chilling. It just underscores that consciousness itself isn't reliant on the motor output systems housed in the brainstem, only the sensory input and those arousal systems like the reticular formation.
Precisely. It's a stark separation.
So we've really established how the brainstem acts as this, well, non-negotiable headquarters for survival, motor control, sensory input. Its ancient, conserved architecture seems designed for redundancy and efficiency.
Absolutely. It's fundamental. And thinking about its maintenance, for centuries, it was widely believed that the central nervous system was completely sealed off, immunologically privileged, lacking the lymphatic drainage systems found everywhere else in the body.
Right. It was thought to rely solely on the cerebrospinal fluid, the CSF, for waste clearance.
Yeah.
Washing through the brain.
Exactly. However, the source we looked at mentions this relatively recent investigation. I mean, a major discovery, really, only in the last decade or so, has revealed these tiny channels within the meninges, the brain's coverings.
Right.
They're now often called the CNS lymphatic system, or sometimes the glymphatic system, depending on the specifics. These channels actively participate in clearing CSS and, importantly, interstitial fluid, the fluid between the brain cells, waste removal.
That fundamentally changes our understanding of brain maintenance and health, doesn't it?
It really does, because if the brainstem is the most foundational, the most critical part of our brain, the part controlling every crucial autonomic function in our state of consciousness, you'd think it needs the absolute highest degree of maintenance possible.
Okay, so here's the final thought then. Given the brainstem's ancient conserved architecture and its fundamental control over consciousness, autonomic function, how might this newly understood, unique lymphatic system impact our understanding of neurodegenerative disease progression? Especially in conditions like Alzheimer's, where we know specific brainstem structures like the locus coeruleus are compromised early on. Could it be that this delicate maintenance system, this brain drainage system failing first, contributes to that vulnerability? Is that part of the puzzle?
That's a fascinating question. Is impaired waste clearance around these critical ancient structures an early step in the cascade?
It's definitely something for you, our listeners, to mull over. How does this new understanding of brain plumbing affect the stem of life?
A powerful new angle on the oldest part of the brain. Indeed.
Until next time, keep digging deeper.